terms of what we're talking about today, we're going to be looking at the commercial and legal factors that startups should be turning their mind to when getting ready to go to market. So whether you're dealing with something digital like a SaaS or an online marketplace or a physical product, um, many of the principles of getting ready to go to market are going to be fairly similar. Now, unfortunately, in most cases, a successful entry into market doesn't just happen organically. While there are some examples of startups that just gain unforeseen momentum overnight or in a matter of days, our experience is that these tend to be the outliers. Most successful startups and traditional businesses for that matter have a clear and robust strategy to get to market set up before they start, which includes legal, financial, and commercial considerations. And if there's a key takeaway that you take from this presentation, we want it to be that preparation is absolutely critical. It's often the case in the world of commercial innovation that your business will move quickly and suddenly. So you might be grinding for months or even years, and then all of a sudden, everything's lined up and you have to prepare agreements, you have to get money ready, you have to enter the market within a matter of weeks of that happening. So having a strategy in place that you can fall back on in situations like these can mean the difference between flourishing or floundering in such a situation. So in this presentation, we're going to look at the commercial and legal steps you need to take to be ready, to be prepared. This includes mapping out your path to market, covering your legal risks, implementing good sales systems and strategies, and ensuring that you have your key legal considerations covered off. Now, we're not going to harp on about this at every single instance, but I just want to mention that as part of everything that we're going to discuss, you should also ensure that adequate housekeeping is a part of each step that your business takes. You should keep records of your systems and your processes, keep a register of all of your agreements, maintain up-to-date financial records. We find that successful businesses are organized and maintain organization throughout their entire journey. So just keeping that disclaimer in mind, we'll get into it and I'll pass it on to Rahul to discuss mapping out your path to market.
Thank you, Talt, and hi all. Just one bit of housekeeping. While Talt is working from the office today, I am at home. So if you do hear a couple of dogs barking, as they tend to do at the wrong time, please do excuse it. So let's talk about path to market and setting this out. I assume we do have founders on this webinar, and so I'd be surprised if you haven't thought about path to market before. And in many cases, it may be something quite intuitive to you. Even if this is the case, you should certainly have a roadmap, which is both visual and measurable when it comes to your path to market. First and foremost, in relation to your path to market and this roadmap, it should be quite clear what is your go-to market goal. What does a successful launch look like for your startup or business? Is it 1,000 customers, for example, in 3 months? Or is it 5 large clients within 6 months? Once you have figured this out, you'll have a better idea and understanding of what steps you need to take to actually reach this goal. We see in pitch competitions quite often, the founders will make statements, and quite aggressive statements, which is great, about, we want within 6 months, 3,000 users, or within 3 years, we'll have an annual revenue of X million. This is all very well and good, but it needs to be made clear, how will this be achieved? To make this clear, your roadmap or your path to market at a minimum should set out, what are your unique selling points? In other words, what sets you apart from the competition? How are you going to validate your offering? How will you communicate with your client base? For some startups, this may be through lead-in mechanisms, i.e. marketing efforts. For others, it will be through reach-out mechanisms, sales efforts, but in most cases, there'll be a healthy blend of both. How will you engage with your clients? More particularly, what will be the nature of the relationship between you and your clients? And so from a legal standpoint, what you want to be thinking about is, will there be unique agreements between your business and each client? Or could you work off a standard template terms and conditions, which will obviously be tailored for your business? Could you partner with certain industry players who will help endorse or promote your products and services? What resources will you need to accomplish your path to market? For some, it may be, this could be achieved, for example, through an external sales or marketing resource. With others, you may be lucky enough to have an internal founder who has an expertise in this area. Further, if you're offering, say, a physical product, you may need to think about developing relationships with manufacturers, importers, exporters, distributors, and retailers. And finally, you should have an understanding of what your capital requirements are. Whether you're bootstrapping or financing, you will obviously do need a clear financial plan. And so, very important to clearly set out your path to market. And I appreciate there was quite a bit there. But what we do see in this space, and having a director who, as we noted at the outset, is an expert in this very space of business development and sales for startups, what we find is startups and founders who put their mind to a path to market and a clear plan are the ones that succeed more often than not. Next slide, thanks, Tolt. So the next part of the presentation, we wanted to touch on validation and pilot studies. As a starting point, validation is important to get a sense of the appetite for your offering. That's what we're really getting at here. Is there a market for your product or your service, or even for your idea? Far too often we work with founders and startups who perhaps it's due to ego sometimes it's just over eagerness to just get cracking, who go too far down a path before even knowing whether there is any interest or whether there is enough interest to make their idea a viable business. There are many ways you can validate your product, but very often the easiest way is to simply ask the community or members within the community that you're targeting. There's this idea out there sometimes in the startup landscape that you shouldn't talk to anyone or share your idea because it's confidential and it's a secret. Even as lawyers, we do get asked quite often when we're approached for legal inquiries to sign an NDA first. Such an approach can be a little uncommercial and it could be doing you a disservice in the long run. Firstly, it's highly unlikely that your idea is so unique that no one else has ever thought of it. And even if it is particularly unique, it's not that often that someone will hear your idea and just drop everything and develop it. If you've come this far on your journey, it's probably because you are uniquely positioned to commercialize that idea and bring it to fruition. The chances that someone will hear your idea and seek to do something similar is fairly low. On the flip side, there is a very realistic possibility that despite how appealing you think your offering is, the market might tell you otherwise, and you're going to start getting an understanding at an early stage of the risks involved. The other thing is talking to members of your target audience and your potential customer base, you're going to get to find out whether people are actually going to put their hard-earned money and whether they would put that hard-earned money towards your products or services. Because there's one thing liking what you have to say and liking your idea. There's another thing, when you ask them, would they part way with their hard-earned? So the validation process will let you know where you currently stand. And it will also let you know that if there isn't really an appetite for exactly what you have in mind, well, how can you pivot to make it more appealing? And you're going to get that feedback, right, through this process. The other more formal ways of validating your product are through pilot studies or arrangements. This is effectively where you engage with key third parties. When I say key third parties, I mean people within the specific industry in which you may be looking to disrupt. It may be a key industry player. It may be a business. It may be a customer. It may be a university or a government body. And what they will do very often is they will help you validate your product and service. For example, if it's a tech-based product, which it very often is, they might help you do some testing to see if there are any bugs. Or in the case of where you might have algorithms or an analytical-based offering, they might do some testing to see whether the process actually works. We have clients who enter into such arrangements often. Recently, a client of ours that have developed an app which is going to be used as a means to provide food delivery services from local restaurants to schools. They're entering into a 6-month pilot with a school. And over this period, what they'll get to do is test whether their platform works, whether there are any glitches. If there are any glitches, they'll obviously be able to fix them. And then they'll also be able to see if there's any, what the appetite is like parents in particular who are the target audience for this app. So while we don't have time in this presentation to discuss every detail of a pilot study, I hope this is giving you some insights of the things to look out for. In terms of the pitfalls and key traps to look out for, it is important when you're entering into such arrangements that you don't just rely on good faith or a handshake agreement. It is particularly important that you put in place an agreement, and that agreement should set out what is the scope of the pilot, and that should be clear for everyone to know. It should have provisions in relation to confidentiality and non-compete. There's likely to be a give and take. So what is everyone expecting to receive? If, for example, if you are engaging a university, that they may be expecting payment, or they may want to be able to use the outcomes that come from the pilot study for their research, to further their research. To the extent that there's any new intellectual property or data created, there should be a clear framework within the agreement, which sets out who owns the rights to use that new info. As a startup founder, you're obviously going to want to leverage that in your own business, and so on and so forth. So it's important to have it documented. The other part I wanted to note here is the value of expressions of interest, right, to your startup. So very often, as you are developing your product or service, to start reaching out to some of your key clients and customers to see if they are interested in your product or service, that they might sign letters of intent, for example, to say, as and when you reach a certain milestone, we would be interested in using your product or service. These letters of intents or expressions of interest can be so valuable to you when you go to raise funds and when you undertake a fundraising round, because investors love to see this. They love to see that there is a market appetite for your product. And so that's something to also keep in mind.
Rahul, just before we move on from this slide, we have had a question in the Q&A. They've just said that when you do talk to the market, how do you ascertain if it's just a like, but no intent to buy, which I think you've just covered with that, getting some expressions of actual intent, or if they would buy. He said, could sometimes it depend on price? And is that the point then you can start making those decisions? I mean, I guess that's part of the benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's asking the questions that and that's the point. It's why move ahead with uncertainties such as the questioner has asked around price, or whether someone would actually pay money for the product or service. So a conversation we normally have with clients around this is exactly that. When people come to us and they say, and this is more around when they seek our assistance for sales, when they tell us that there's a market appetite and people like what they have to offer, we do often ask, do you think they will pay for it though? Because that's a very different proposition, right? And sometimes, look, some startups, their whole strategy is actually not around initially having clients pay for it, but developing customer bases and offering things for free, and then selling add-ons or a version of their app which has unique functions, and that's when you pay. So I appreciate the different strategies, but it's about asking the questions, right?
I'll also just add, it's not only about whether or not they will pay, but how much they're willing to pay and whether that will be enough to cover off your expenses, break even, and turn a profit. So as an example, I was talking to some founders of a platform that was very much focused on independent artists. And their initial model was to charge a subscription fee of $110 per month. And then after they did some of that validation, they realized that your average independent artist isn't prepared to pay that sort of money on this sort of platform. So they had to reassess their model, reassess their revenue model. And if they hadn't done that validation, as and when they got to their launch, they might have just been looking like they weren't being serious with the market because they were charging way too high. So as well as finding out whether they will pay, finding out how much they'll pay, how much signups you'll need to break even and turn a profit over time.
Fantastic, great advice. Thank you. And to keep those questions coming in the chat, and I'll keep monitoring. Thank you.
So we'll talk a little bit now about sales strategies and sales systems. And you'll see there's a fun little graphic on the screen that I'll talk through in a bit. But one of the key features of setting up that roadmap to market that Rahul talked you through before is designing in advance what your sales strategy and your sales systems will be. Now, this will likely vary depending on whether your business model is B2B, B2C, or a blend of both, as it often is. But broadly speaking, most businesses will communicate with their customers through either lead-in or reach-out techniques. So lead-in techniques include things like marketing, word of mouth, advertising, general promotional activities, which usually involves investing in these promotional systems and activities that are designed to raise this awareness around your product, that encourages customers to get in touch with you and make their own inquiries, hence leading in. Reach out techniques are more associated with your traditional business development, such as cold calling, networking, setting up meetings, and closing deals. While this has its foundations in more traditional business models, there's absolutely no reason why it can't be adapted to suit progressive and innovative startups. To be honest, most startups that we work with, especially in the B2B space, they really invest heavily in these sort of reach out strategies because it's a great way to land a large, commercial clients. And we're going to be talking a bit more about this sort of strategy in this presentation. Now, a key learning to keep in mind here when it comes to doing those reach outs and getting in touch with people that you want to land as your clients is to be honest and upfront. So it can be appealing, and I think it's become a bit more popular over the last couple of years, to try and reach out to somebody in a way that entices them to meeting with you by getting them to think that they'll be making money out of this arrangement. You've probably received messages like this in your email or LinkedIn inbox. I certainly have. And while it can be an effective way to get a first meeting, it's going to quickly become clear that you're actually there trying to secure their custom, not the other way around. So not only will this lead to a confusing first meeting because each side thinks that it's selling to the other one, and it's also going to be much less likely to lead to a closed deal. So we encourage our clients when implementing these processes to be straightforward and honest in what they're saying. And believe in what you're offering. If you have an offering which is needed in your target markets, you shouldn't need to mislead potential clients to get their attention. You can be upfront when you reach out to them. Now,
can I just add to Bob's word there? I mean, and that's very much what we do with our own business as well, in terms of keeping it authentic and just being yourselves. And we find the level of traction you get when you do that is far more. It's far higher than being something you're not.
Absolutely. Even if long term what you're offering might make or save them money, that might be the case. But in the first instance, you are trying to secure their custom, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can be upfront and you can be honest with that. But before you start sending those emails or making those cold calls, it's really important to set up your sales system, which is a small example is what we have on the screen here. It should be a system that's repeatable, that's simple, and that can be utilized over and over again for each of your prospective clients. And just like your path to market, it's helpful to map the system out. So we usually recommend the following steps. First of all, you want to scope out what we refer to as your first push. So a push is effectively a sales effort in which you're going to try to land as many new customers as you can during a set period. For example, 3 months. And then you should have a strategy for you to implement that push. So for example, if you were to start this process today, your first push might be for July to September of this year. Now, and then following from that, you have your second push and your third push, but I'll get to that soon. In terms of implementing this process, you want to spend the first part of that push building your hit list, which isn't as violent of a term as it sounds. And while there's no reason why a hit list can't be fluid and can't be constantly updated, starting out your first push with an already generated and populated hit list of clients can really help you gain momentum and keep that momentum as you're working your way through that first 3-month period. This list should include the customer, a key contact within that organization, that person's contact details, and a short background about the client. Now, if you populate that list, within the first week of your first push with 60 or 70 or 100 potential clients to reach out to, and each one has their email, that blurb, that background, that key contact detail, you can start working through them one by one. And over that 3 months, you've set up an incredible database of people to reach out to. But before you start doing that, you want to plan your communication pathways. And this is what we have on the screen. This is the system by which you establish your first contact and then each possible action that will follow. So you start with your first touch, which is obviously the first contact that you make with this potential lead. It might be an email, it might be a cold call, it might be something in their LinkedIn inbox, or it could be something else altogether. Whatever it is, you're establishing that first contact, I mean to say. Now, from there, the pathway splits into two possible outcomes. The first outcome, which is the ideal one, is that they've responded positively towards your first touch. That means that they have indicated an interest in what you're selling, or they're indicating an openness to meet with you further and discuss further. If this happens, you put them into your nurture screen and it drops down on the right side of the screen there. Or unfortunately, as is often the case, you get a negative response. That means that either they don't respond at all, or they respond telling you that they're not interested. And then that goes into the other side of the email pathway, and you move to your second touch. And then you repeat this process pretty much over and over again until the person that you're reaching out to either converts into a deal or a sale, or you decide that the lead has gone cold and you've done enough reaching out. But you really have to persevere here. I mean, we've seen situations with clients where they haven't got a response to a first touch or a second touch or a third touch over a period of 6 months. But finally, through diligence and making sure they, keep on reaching out to this person, that has eventually converted into being quite a valuable client. And this process that I mapped out here, it should be mapped out and it shouldn't just happen randomly. So before you even get started, you should know exactly what's going to be the tone and the messaging in that first email, how much time you're going to leave between that first touch and that second touch. If you get a negative response, it might be a week, it might be a fortnight. It really depends on what you're trying to sell and what your approach is. And then you have to think about how is the messaging going to change between each attempt. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to just send the same email on repeat. There's a reason why they've rejected or not responded to that first one. So now you have to up the game, you have to change your angle, you have to try and find a new way to bring them to your table. And like I said before, this can take a long time and this process can be frustrating, especially because sales tends to be just as much about rejection as it is about success. But having the sales system in place and committing to it will definitely make it a lot easier, not just practically, but also psychologically, and moving through this process. And then if you just try to do it ad hoc and randomly. During this first push, especially, don't be afraid to get experimental with the messaging that you're reaching out with. It's actually really valuable to test different approaches to trying to convert a lead. It's a little bit like that validation that we were talking about before. If you're doing your first round of reach outs to people, you don't necessarily know what's going to work. So try 5 different styles in that first push, see what comes back, see what doesn't, and then you can take these learnings into your second push. And that's going to increase your failure to success ratio because you adopt the messaging that worked, and then you leave behind the messaging that didn't. Now, that's more about the first option if it goes into a rejection and a second touch and a third touch. The better option, obviously, or the better outcome rather, is that you get them into what we call a nurture stream. Once you have a client in your nurture stream, this means that they've responded positively in some way. They haven't closed yet as a deal, but you think that you can get them there. You think you can pull them over that line. And during this process, while it's still good to have a system in place, you do need to be prepared to be a bit more flexible and a bit more ready to think on your feet when going through this process. But a good mechanism to keep you on track is to go into each meeting, each conversation that you have with one of these nurtured leads with an ideal outcome and a fallback outcome. So for example, an ideal outcome might be that they write you a check, they sign up to your product, whatever it is, they turn into a client. You might not get that. You might get your fallback outcome, however, which is that they're ready to have another meeting and talk about this further, or they'd like you to send through some further information or do some more inquiries and just think about this a bit longer before committing. And look, this fallback outcome is still pretty good because they're still in that nurture stream and you can still close that client down the line. Having these outcomes in mind will help you keep your focus on your messaging during the meeting and keep that conversation on track. And while you're having that conversation, another good tip is to try and strike a balance between genuinely listening to what the other party has to say, but at the same time, making sure that you're pitching your own product or business. You don't want to come off as overly pitchy or overly salesy or overly braggadio, but at the same time, it needs to be clear that you want them as a customer, that you're selling your product or your business to them, and that you're confident and believe in that. So a good way to achieve this balance is by structuring your pitch as why your product should appeal to that person or that business specifically. Instead of just pitching it like you might at a pitch competition, do some research first. You know, who is this potential client that you're talking to? What space do they work in? And how come your new SaaS or your new product or whatever it is will benefit them and their business specifically? This sort of approach allows you to talk about your product, but at the same time, listen to and take into account their needs all at once. Now, when you do have these meetings finally convert into clients and you start generating revenue, as well as all of these sales and commercial considerations, there are a lot of legal considerations that come to mind as well. With every sale, there is also an agreement. With every business venture, there's a law that applies. So I'll pass it over to Rahul now to just close off on some of those legal considerations you should keep in mind while going to market.
Thanks, Tolt. Just if I can add to a couple of points to what Tolt was sharing there, in terms of keeping tabs of you know, the roadmap or that tree that he had up as a slide. There are plenty of very good tools available out there, which are even free. Things like Trello that we've used as well internally, and to you know, keep tabs on first touches, second touches, nurturing, all that kind of stuff. The other part of this is you know, while it might seem overly archaic or difficult to actually keep tabs of these different processes and procedures, what we have found and what we have seen as through what's been implemented for clients with such systems is that those that do keep tabs, those that do stick to the process, are the ones that that succeed. Obviously, the other part is the basic common sense stuff of, you know, going through your own networks, LinkedIn, etc., to ensure that when you're reaching out, to the extent there's a warm connection there, leverage all of that, right? Because that obviously helps build a level of credibility prior to rather than just reaching out cold. But there are cases where you just have to reach out cold because there's no other option. Thanks, Tolt. So yeah, in terms of the key legal issues, believe it or not, this is probably the part of the presentation we've spent the least amount of time putting together, because I guess we know it back to front. But having said, in terms of going to market and in terms of selling, there's always, of course, going to be a legal aspect to that. Firstly, there's likely to be a legislative or regulatory framework that you need to account for in addition. So that will be things that apply across the board, such as consumer protections and whatnot, making sure that you are not misleading or deceiving, etc. And there may be certain industry-specific rules and regulations that apply to you. By way of example, we do a fair bit in the health space and working with founders that are looking to disrupt the health space. There's often an overarching layer of laws and regulations that sometimes apply to founders who are looking at that space. Protecting your intellectual property. So this is just ensuring that as part of you going to market and selling, that you know that there's a step before that which we obviously assist and advise on, which is making sure that your the most valuable asset of your business, which is your IP, is protected. Now, it's probably outside the scope of today's presentation as to the means and steps for doing that, but it goes unsaid that needs to be front of mind. And then there are the key agreements, right? So you're selling something. On what terms are you selling it, right? And one thing we do always say is that a well-drafted and put together set of terms of sale is also good collateral when it comes to having a good sales process. Because if a client is clear on the terms on which you're selling, and they're properly drafted and they are well articulated, well, they're more likely to engage with you, right? So having, as I said, it may be a standard terms and conditions that you have on which you sell your products or services, which you adapt from customer to customer. There may be a schedule, you know, things like obviously the customer's details, the term of the arrangement, etc., may change, but there's likely to be the otherwise the T's and C's are likely to be the same over time and again. To the extent that you're engaging with distributors or on sellers, these arrangements should be properly documented. Again, what we do see quite commonly nowadays in distribution arrangements, the distributor themselves can be quite aggressive in terms of what they want in these agreements and these arrangements in terms of access to documentation relating to your business, and even sometimes encroaching on your intellectual property. So it's suffice to say that you should seek legal assistance when you're looking at such arrangements. And then there may be other more commercial or collaborative approaches that you take to promoting or selling your products or services. And this may be partnering with other industry players. It may be partnering with or partnering with someone who a business that's selling a product or a technology which is highly compatible or complementary to yours. So we've done this recently for a client where we've prepared what we've described as an affiliate agreement, where effectively they're partnering up with other tech companies. Our client itself is in the tech space, and they're partnering up with other technology-based companies where they are effectively going to market in a collaborative way to integrate their products. So they speak to one another, which is obviously for the betterment of the end user. And they're finding that means of going to market is resulting in increased sales for them. So in terms of the legal issues, I'll leave it at that, unless, and if you've got any questions around legals associated with sales and marketing, feel free to ask. But and that brings us to the end of the presentation, and we'll open it up to any Q&A if there is any.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. So much great, fantastic information in there. So yes, we have opened it up for a good amount of time. So we can spend the next sort of 15 minutes or so with some questions. So feel free to pop those in the chat or jump on the Q&A as well. And we can answer those questions live for you, which, you know, let's use Rahul and Tolt while we've got them here, so we can get that information there. So I might just give everyone a couple of minutes to get their sort of questions together and different things, which we can do. I wonder, Rahul and Tolt, if you might be able to share maybe, and this is just on the fly, you obviously haven't prepared this, but maybe a bit of a case study of a startup that you've recently helped in this regard, and maybe some of the challenges that they faced, or, you know, some of the successes that worked really well for them. Have you got anything to share in relation to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So a good success story is a startup that was, it's actually an international startup that looking to enter the Australian market. And as part of helping them, obviously, with the legal issues associated with that, we built a sales strategy for them, leveraging and working with them to firstly develop collateral to help us. And when I say us, this is more my fellow director in there who's got the expertise there, go to market. And very much identifying, you know, channels to market. Prior to that, what are their goals? What are they looking to achieve? How many revenue-wise, customers-wise, and then from there working to see, well, what are their channels to market? So how do we go about doing the first touches and the second touches, and who do we know within the industry who can help us with this process? And it's been so successful. They've you know, they're gaining market traction. They are very happy with their decision to enter into the market, and they're increasing sales. So it's very much a systemized approach, even though it's selling, it's very fluid, and it is when you're sort of at the cold face and actually, you know, speaking to a prospective client or a customer. But what we do find is when it's a systemized approach, though, it certainly works. So that's one example. But there are most of the clients that we assist is very much on a similar basis to what I've described. It's very much systematic in terms of what we've just walked you through. So, you know, goals, establishing those, establishing what are the resources internally to help us get there, and then working with the founders to kind of tick off those boxes in terms of reach outs and creating target lists and whatnot. I don't know if there's anything over and above that, Tolt, you wanted to add.
Tolt, And I have another question.
Oh, yeah.
So roughly how long does those processes take? I mean, I know that's a bit of a loaded question because it would depend, I guess, upon the product and the founders and the timing and different things. But say just on your standard, I mean, how long should they be taking? Because I have seen a lot of some startups get so caught up in the piloting and the testing, and they kind of almost get this paralysis to launch. What sort of, in your experience, do you think, roughly they should be thinking? And when is enough research is enough and you've just got to pull the trigger and actually go for it?
Good question. So there's a bit there. In terms of the process I've just described, where you're market ready and you're good to go, we normally find just to embed the sort of plan to action 3 months, and then from there we have what we call sprints to try and hit targets and whatever that might be, 10 customers in X amount of time. We go from there. In terms of you're right, there can be what's the phrase, analysis paralysis. It's a difficult one. It does really vary from startup to startup. An example of exactly what you're talking about, Karen, is we've had with a client that's in the oil and gas space, where they've got some amazing technology, which is around, it's a bit complex, but it's around disrupting how you decommission oil and gas platforms. That's what they do. Now, there's a lot of validation and process and stress testing involved with this, but they've partnered up with certain universities to make sure that basically what their output is correct. But what they're finding is that there's a range between of accuracy, right? So it's between plus and minus 20%, and they're going to market with that. And obviously we're drafting the relevant T's and C's around that the accuracy of what their output is going to be plus or minus that, that range. But that still is providing their end user with obviously a benefit, because they're streamlining a process. Now, as they go to market, they're obviously looking to get their accuracy rate up, but at the same time, they're talking to industry participants and starting to get these letters of intents and all of these things up and running, and it's helping them also raise money in the meantime.
Love it. And there is a question that's just been popped in the chat, but before I ask you that, just to flow on, just to finish this sort of topic off. So there is actually, as you were talking through that, I'm thinking a lot of that sort of data collection point and what you're sort of those letters of intent, you did mention it, but just to sort of, I guess, emphasize it, when you're then seeking funding, whether it be by grants or VC or angel or whatever portal of method, crowdfunding that you're going for, that all then gets used, doesn't it? Because that all forms your pitch, your investment pitch. So there is sort of an other than just going to market, there's actually a funding push behind that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking to raise funds and you're providing an investor evaluation, which very much in the startup landscape tends to be based on potential, while the idea might sound great, they want to know, as we said during the presentation, that someone will actually buy and spend money on your idea. And if you've got something from a key client or a key or a highly reputable industry player that says this is good and we would use it if you meet certain milestones, that really helps with fundraising activities, and it helps substantiate your valuation. Great.
Absolutely. And I'll just put from where I sit within, what we do with Legally Yours and the legal marketplace, the fact that you've got this service and you've got this understanding and this nous is just gold. There's not really any other, I guess, that I can think of in the legal player that has this kind of nous put behind them. And I love the fact that you're able to kind of take a startup and yes, you're doing the legal, but you've got so much more in terms of the commerciality and what happens. So you can actually be with them to support them through the journey, which for any founders that are listening in at the moment, that's amazing, really amazing stuff. Now, we've had a question. Is there a revenue model tool that you would recommend?
A revenue model tool? Not off the top of my head.
Todd, got any suggestions?
Nothing comes to mind on this one. It's might be something more for an accountant, but Rahul, you might have something.
No, I mean, we've seen, I'll I've seen many, but in terms of something that's sort of I'd recommend or readily available, let me have a think and also speak to others, and I might come back through to through you, Karen.
Yeah, of course, and we can provide that off to the hub. We do have
Yep.
a partner of Legally Yours, and this might not be exactly what you're thinking for the person that's asked the question, but it's called Kotchy, COTCHY.io. They start off, it's a monthly subscription model, and it can start off as simple doing your bookkeeping, but it basically has all the functionality to help you with your cap table and get quite sophisticated with how you're sort of, tracking with your revenue and everything in there. So if it's something like that you're looking for, you can't go past Kotchy.io. They're a partner of Legally Yours, but just amazing in this space from an accounting perspective. So
to be honest, most of our clients are still on the old school Excel and
there you go, Kotchy, COTCHY.io. I've actually just filmed a series with Pat Mannix, who's the founder, and he comes from 42 years in the industry of accounting and helping startups kind of get into that scale up model and raise revenue. So they've purpose built this platform just for startups in that phase where you just need to get going, and then they can help you with your cap table and everything in there. So if you're interested in that, email me at kfinch@legallyyours.com.au. I can actually send you some information on Kotchy. So there you go. Well, we've hit on to the 150 mark. I don't think we've got any other questions. Yep, apart from a thank you acknowledgement. Thank you for asking the question. Danny, we might sort of wrap up things there. I don't know if you have any member announcements or if you would like to say anything to the members before we head off. But on behalf of Legally Yours, thank you for everyone that's attended. And Rahul and Tolt, thank you so much. I absolutely love listening into your sessions. So much gold information in there. And yes, please reach out to alliedlegal.com.au. You can find Rahul also on our platform at legallyyours.com.au too. Thank you.